Good afternoon. This is the July webinar session for the Florida Health Sciences Library Association and the Tampa Bay Library Consortium collaboration. My name is Mary Kate Haver. I am a former chair, vice president of FHSLA. We initiated this session, this project with TBLC to encourage networking amongst colleagues both within the health sciences librarianship and public libraries. We'd like to share information that we have available and also connect with everyone and possibly work with you in the future. Today our topic is youth sports safety. Our presenters are Jacqueline Kasek and Jessica Daly. We are willing to cover topics each month that are of high interest to you. So if you have any suggestions, please share those with us. The contact information will appear at the end of the presentation. These webinar sessions are open to members of FHSLA and TBLC, and they are recorded for viewing access later, both through the TBLC YouTube channel and the FHSLA website. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Jacqueline Kasek. She's the manager of library services at Tampa General Hospital, and she'll be presenting on resources for parents for children. Jacqueline?
Hello, thank you very much, Mary Kate.
Thanks.
So as mentioned, I will be covering some resources for parents regarding youth sports and looking at resources parents can use to help children get involved in sports. And then of course, something that's probably on a lot of parents' minds is the effect COVID-19 is going to have on return to play. So aside from helping children build and maintain healthy bones, muscles, and joint, helping control weight, preventing or delaying the development of high blood pressure and cardiovascular issues, there are many other benefits to getting children involved in youth sports or just physical activity in general. But as far as youth sports goes, children that are involved have improved life skills such as goal setting, relationship building, time management, teamwork, leadership, and work ethic. They also have increased self-esteem and confidence. In a survey of 400 female corporate executives, they found that 94% of them had played a sport as a child or an adolescent, and 61% of them said that their engagement with those sports contributed to their career success. A 2013 study found that children who played sports had lower rates of depression and suicidal thoughts, and they engaged in less high-risk health behaviors. Another comprehensive analysis found that leisure physical activity is associated with a reduced risk of 13 different types of cancers. So with all these benefits, there's also a lot of concerns that parents have if their child is already in sports or if they haven't yet found a sport that was good for them. So some of these common concerns that parents often have is they don't know what sport would be a good fit for their child. They may be worried about safety or risk of injury in the sports. They might be worried that their child will prioritize sports over their academic work and that will suffer as a consequence. They might be wondering how they can help their children excel at sports without putting too much pressure on them about that. And then there's also considerations and challenges for children with special needs. And then more recently, of course, is kind of being concerned about what impacts will COVID-19 have on youth sports. So the resources I'll be sharing today will contain information and tools that can help answer these questions. The Aspen Institute is a global nonprofit organization committed to realizing a free, just, and equitable society. It was founded in 1949 and drives change through dialogue, leadership, and action to help solve some of the most important challenges facing the U.S. and the United States, and the world. The Aspen Institute has a sports and society program that provides a venue where thought leadership and innovative strategies can be developed. With the focus on sports, they look at everything from building healthy communities through sports to rethinking the model for college athlete pay. One of the Sport and Society's program initiatives is Project Play. So Project Play was launched in 2013, and it develops, applies, and shares knowledge that helps build healthy communities through sports. They produce reports that take measure of the state of play at national, regional, and city levels. And in 2015, Project Play released a report that was the first national framework on how to provide all children 12 and under access to quality, affordable sports activities. And this publication is called Sport for All, Play for Life, a playbook to get every kid in the game. And this offers a model based on the values of health and inclusion with 8 strategies or plays, as they're called in the publication, for the 8 sectors that touch the lives of children. So this came about from 2 years of roundtables with over 250 experts to find opportunities and solutions. And the 8 plays are here in the little box, looking at asking kids what they want, reintroducing free play, encouraging sports sampling, revitalizing in-town leagues, and you see the rest of them there. This is just an example. And this is a freely available publication anyone can get. Project Play, that's okay, you can go ahead, Mary Kate. Project Play also has a checklist series. Navigating youth sports can be very confusing and frustrating for parents. They often don't know what questions to ask. So the Project Play checklist provides 10 simple questions that parents should ask of themselves, their child, and their sports providers to make sure that they're having a great sports experience. Each set of questions is broken up in age and activity level groups. So there is a checklist for children 0 to 5 years old, and then they have 2 for children 6 to 12. One is for children who already are playing sports, and then the other one is for children who do not play sports. So each checklist, as you can see here, is preceded by a video that gives further detail on what is in each checklist, as well as milestones for those age groups, do's and don'ts, and tips for encouraging children in their sports. Another resource from Project Play, again, this Project Play is a really great resource for parents who have questions about getting their children involved in sports. So the Project Play Parent Mailbag is a place for questions and answers. They ask parents to submit questions or issues that they're struggling with, and once a month they'll answer 2 to 3 of the most commonly asked questions. And the advice comes from leaders in youth sports, and if there are health-related questions, they're answered with guidance from the CDC or other reliable health resources. These are some of the questions that they have. There is one kind of drawback to this resource that I noticed. So it's pretty new. It started in January, I want to say, and they weren't too consistent with posting new questions every month. Of course, in June, there were 3 questions because, of course, there's a lot more questions about, COVID-19 and return to play. So you can see here the 3 most recent questions do have to do with that. And then the most recent one before that was in February. Should parents talk to coaches who contribute to bad sports experiences? And then the one below that was from January. So I'm not sure if they're going to keep being consistent with that, but these are questions that, a lot of parents do have. There are a few more on the page as well, but I'm hoping that this will become a really good resource for parents. And finally, for Project Play, the last resource that they have that I wanted to highlight was the Healthy Sport Index. So this is the world's first ever tool that assesses the relative benefits and risks of participating in the most popular sports for adolescents. It combines the best available data, expert analysis to identify the relative benefits and risks of participating in the 10 most popular high school sports for boys and girls. It was developed in partnership with a hospital for special surgery and with the guidance of an advisory group of medical doctors, researchers, and other specialists whose experience spanned a range of disciplines, sports, and athlete populations. So the index, as you'll see on the next slide, can be fully customizable by adjusting a dial based on specific health criteria. The sports that are most compatible with the user's needs are listed with detailed descriptions, and each sport is then broken down even further for each area of the assessment and the needs that you'll see on the dial, activity level, safety, and psychosocial aspects. So this is what you'll see when you go to use this tool. On the left, you can see the slider, and you can move that based on if whichever aspect, if it's a low emphasis that you want on the sport or a high emphasis. So many parents might want to make sure that safety is of the highest emphasis. So just in this example, I put that one up high. This particular slide, the circle there doesn't match up to the left side of the slider, but it's just to give you an idea of what it will look like. So then after you complete this portion, it will give you a listing of the different sports that they recommend that meet those needs on the slider. And they also have a compare tool that will let you compare 2 or more sports, and it will also give you suggestions for complementary sports, as well as best practices for safety for each sport. Then they break each sport down a little further, looking at those 3 aspects that you ranked on the slider. Next slide.
Sorry, I jumped ahead. I apologize.
That's okay.
Is this the right slide?
The next one.
Okay.
Thank you. So after you select the sport that you saw on the previous slide, it will break down each segment here. So you can see the physical activity. They break it down by what percentage of the sport is lying, sitting, or standing, walking, or vigorous exercise. So this can help determine if it's a good fit, maybe for a child who might not have been involved in sports and might not be, in peak physical fitness. Maybe they want to choose starting out a sport that isn't as vigorous exercise. And then the second segment that we look at is safety. So they give you the injury rate, what percent of injuries required surgery, and the concussion rate. So it can give you a good idea of how safe the sport is. And then for the psychosocial portion, they do rank several different categories, such as initiative, goal setting, cognitive skills, and then negative experiences. There are also some other ones that I didn't include on this slide because it does go into a lot more detail on the psychosocial one. But one thing I want to point out is that it does also give ratings for the risk of cigarette smoking and substance abuse of adolescents in that sport, as well as academic achievement and completion rates, self-esteem, social support, and loneliness. So it gives a really good perspective on the psychosocial impact that sport might have on the child. So now what's on many people's minds, of course, is COVID-19. So I know, we've already experienced so many changes to the way we interact socially and professionally, and parents especially have had to adapt to changes with schooling. So as we get closer to schools reopening, there's no doubt many concerns and questions surrounding youth sports as well. So next we'll look at some recommendations from the CDC and state-specific organization, as well as a few other resources that parents can use. So I'm sure we're all, and most of the public is probably very, very familiar with the CDC guidelines now. But the CDC does offer an abundance of considerations for ways in which youth sports organizations can protect players, families, and communities. Um, Administrators of youth sports organizations should consult with the state and local health officials to determine if and how to put these considerations into place. And of course, it should be, the implementation should be guided by what is practical, acceptable, and tailored to the needs of each community. So the CDC does have a resource for youth sports specifically. If you could go back one slide, please. Yep. No, you're fine. So they do have these this website specifically on youth sports, and the link is down below. Now this is more kind of geared towards providers of youth sports and organizations that run youth sports in the community. However, it still is really useful for parents to take a look at, just to kind of give them an idea of what plans might be in place, what to expect, or maybe what kinds of questions to ask their local youth sports provider, especially if they're not following this guidance. So on this page, you'll find guiding principles, which is where the CDC provides the risk levels for each type of sport. And then assessing risk goes into further detail on each risk level, and then also the different interactions, often part of different sports, and ways to either change or avoid them to decrease risk of transmission during play. Reducing spread, of course, reinforces the prevention strategies we're all familiar with: distancing, wearing of masks, and hand hygiene. Healthy environment operations looks at sanitizing, proper signage, and physical barriers when needed, as well as guidance for game scheduling, traveling for sports, and then restrictions and precautions for spectators. Then on a more local level, we have some guidelines from the Florida Recreation and Park Association. They have a whole document of guidelines for reopening Florida's youth and adult sports. And these guidelines were created to provoke thought around considerations sports organizations should make for their specific city and county environments. They were developed with input from several city parks departments across the state. And as I mentioned with the CDC resource, parents can also use this one to become aware of what's expected and what to look for and what questions they might want to ask. They are very much in line with the CDC considerations, but they are in a nice checklist format, and does have some considerations that are more specific to Florida in particular. And then a couple more resources that I wanted to mention for COVID-19 specifically, again, come from Project Play. It's just a really, really good resource for parents. So one would be the Project Play mailbag that we looked at, because they do have those questions that get answered about the COVID considerations and concerns that parents have. And then they also have a really nice section of articles and webinars. So these are on-demand webinars that feature key topics in the return to play and impact COVID-19 has had on community-based and school-based youth sports. And many of these webinars feature professional athletes and youth sports leaders. So you can see some of the topics are over here on the right. I know it might be a little hard to read them, but the topics are prioritizing life skills as we return to play, the path forward, where they look at the potential to rebuild the grassroots sports system after COVID-19, and then how should youth sports return to play. So these are all really good webinars or videos that feature professional athletes and youth sports leaders, just to kind of give some guidance and thoughts surrounding return to play. And those were all the resources that I recommend for any parent who is concerned about return to play and how to get their children involved in sports. If there's any questions. Let me check the chat box.
Yeah, I'm checking the chat box to see. One suggestion is that we create a list of the actual individual resources to post so that people can, quickly click on the
Yeah,
link
sure.
to the resources. And we will definitely look into that and, format it so it is easier to, because the objective is to be able to, for people to get to these quickly and utilize them. So
Definitely. Okay. Do that.
I think we did have another question about whether uh, the videos are going to be accessible to the public, and I believe so, but we will confirm that. I'm 99 and 9/10 sure they will be, but we'll double check. There's a question about has anyone had experience with exercise prescriptions for children from their doctors? It's been introduced for adults. So has anyone heard of the prescriptions for
I don't think I've run across that
pediatricians
yet.
implementing?
Personally, haven't run across that yet, but possible. So the about the question for teens, the best resource that I found for that one was the Project Play Healthy Sport Index, because that one is specifically for adolescents.
Okay. And actually, if you like, as we'll have Jessica start her presentation next, but we'll also have opportunity to ask additional questions at the end of the session. So let me introduce Jessica. She's the Consumer Health Librarian at the Clifford E. Grace Community Health Library with Orlando Health in Orlando. Jessica, welcome and thank you for volunteering to present today.
Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and get going in our topic. Today we are going to talk about injury prevention because that's definitely something we want to focus on, prevention instead of treatment if at all possible. So first we're going to take a look at a few facts about youth sports. And we know that more American children are now competing in sports more than ever before. There's just so many different opportunities to do so, especially within our communities. Different league sports, and then also school. And we know that sports help children and adolescents just keep fit, and we've talked about that already, and really feel better about themselves. It really is a source of self-confidence. But however, in kind of the opposite of that, or the flip of that, there are some important injury prevention tips that you can know about as parents to promote a more safe and really an optimal experience for your child. So what are our injury risks? And what we find out when we do the research is that all sports have a risk of injury, no matter what they are. Fortunately, for most of the youth, the benefits outweigh those risks. So really, there are more positives to negatives about being involved in youth sports. And also, the more contact in a sport, we understand there is going to be a greater risk of severe or traumatic injury. But most injuries in young athletes are actually due to something called overuse, and we're going to talk about that today. And then the most frequent type of sports injuries are, remain very minor. So strains, pulling a muscle, stress fractures, sometimes injuries to bones, but also this comes from excessive stress placed on these things. And that's when we talk about the overuse. So when children are growing, there is a point of tenderness over a bone, and we really have to be careful of that and thoughtful of that. So any more information on that, we really encourage you to contact your pediatrician, especially if you're concerned about stress fractures. So what is an overuse injury? This might be a new term for some of us. So overuse injury is damage to a bone, muscle, ligament, or tendon. And it really comes from repetitive stress without allowing our bodies to heal. Shin splints are an example of that. I know I've experienced those before. They're horrible. But really we see that overuse injuries have 4 stages. So let's take a look at the stages. First, you have pain in the affected area after physical activity. But then you have pain during the physical activity. So let's take a look at the difference there. Example for me, just being really transparent, I probably am not in shape like I should. Just the other day, I was out in the yard and I planted 3 beds of flowers. So I was stooping and bending, and the next day, my upper thigh on the front, it killed me every time I sat down and got up. So that would be stage 1, because after a day or so, it was gone. When I went back out to do some more yard work, it didn't hurt. But had I gone out and felt pain as soon as I stooped down, I would be in level 2. And then level 3 is pain during physical activity that restricts your performance. So it hurts bad enough that you can't do the activity or the sport. And then 4 is definitely serious when it becomes chronic. It hurts all the time, even when you're resting. So how can we reduce this risk of injury? The first thing is just to take some time off. Let me just say that for a lot of even adolescent or child athletes, you don't have a lot of time off. I know several friends and family members of my own, just talking on a personal level, have children that play sports in school, then they do weekend sports, and they rarely have a day where they're not having some type of physical activity with that sport. So it could be the actual games or events or meets. It could also be prepping or exercising, training for that. So it is good to have at least 1 day off per week. And what we find is that a lot of child athletes don't even take 1 day a week off. And so your body needs time to recover. The next thing is wearing the right gear. Often we find that players or children who are players don't wear the appropriate equipment, such as pads, protective equipment, and it also may not fit properly. So what happens often is a child wants to play a sport and they find out that they can borrow something from their cousin or another friend, but often it's not fitting properly. So be really careful with that. And we want to make sure that our equipment is protecting areas such as your neck, shoulders, elbows, chest, knees, your shins, and that you're wearing helmets when needed. And mouthpieces are something that are really important just to protect not only your jaw, but your teeth. And then face guards are often required, protective cups, and eyewear. And so we find out that a lot of young athletes assume that they don't need this protective gear because they think that the injuries won't be dangerous or risky, but they really could be. And then strengthening muscle. Conditioning exercises is really important. And I know I said taking a break, but I'll also say here that if the only time the child is doing any muscle conditioning is during the sport, that could cause injury. So you want to have some warm-up exercises, maybe some cool down, and maybe some things to do in between on days that you're not having meets or games or events, so that you can just really keep those muscles in good condition. And of course, that goes in with increasing flexibility. Stretching really does need to be part of their daily fitness plan. And then using proper technique. And this really needs to be reinforced during the play-in season. We hope that you get support from your coaches and trainers and things like that. But if you're not sure, make sure that you possibly even talk with your pediatrician about that. So we also, break it down so that you can see this in a different way. I'm a visual learner, so I loved this. Make sure that you're taking breaks. It could be even breaks during practice or games, just to reduce injury or prevent heat illness, especially with outdoor sports. And when we're talking about areas like Central Florida, really the entire East Coast, during the summer, it is very hot. And even into our fall, we have some hot weather. Also, we want to play safe. So restrict rules against heading first into the base or spearing the football or checking in hockey, and don't play through pain. If your child explains to you that something's hurting, you may have to be the one to step in and say they're not playing this game. And then avoid heat illness. The biggest thing I can tell you is drinking plenty of fluids, especially before, during, and after exercise or play, and decrease or stop practices during high heat humidity periods. Really that is dangerous. I know I often hear about that taking place, but you may have to use your judgment as a parent with that. And also wear light clothing, or wear clothing that, there's a lot of new fabrics out now that talk about, cooling fabrics or fabrics that breathe, such as cotton. So be really aware of that as well. And if children are jumping on a trampoline, I added this in, even though this may not be youth sports, this is something that came up time and time again. These are in a lot of our backyards. They need to be supervised, and only one child should be on the trampoline at a time. And of course, 75% of trampoline injuries occur when more than one person's jumping. And I know it's so tempting and so fun to jump with other people, but a good friend of ours, years ago, her daughter is now, I think, 20 or 21, but she was jumping on a trampoline with some other friends, and they weren't doing any tricks, anything. She just came down wrong, broke her leg, had to have extensive surgery and also rehab just from being on a trampoline. So be really cautious with that. So sports-related emotional stress. I always like to talk about our health when it comes to that, not only our physical, but our emotional. And so the pressure to win can cause a lot of emotional stress for children. And sadly, in research, we find out that many coaches and parents consider winning the most important aspect when they were surveyed. So young athletes need to be judged on their effort and their sportsmanship and hard work, not on how many wins or how many points they score. And that pressure, even though parents sometimes don't see the effects of it, can really cause detrimental effects to the emotional stress and emotional well-being of their children. They also should be rewarded for trying hard and improving their skills rather than punished or criticized. I know a lot of people think that may be a part of tough love or toughening them up, but what studies find is that when they're punished or criticized, two things will happen. They will either give up on sports altogether, stop doing them, or they will really turn kind of a bad leaf with sports, where their attitude and their sportsmanship really suffers. So the main goal needs to be having fun and learning lifelong physical activity skills. So we talked about taking time off, but this is big enough and I saw it enough that I thought it needed a dedicated slide. So when we look at the American Academy of Pediatrics, they gave us some, facts and some things to really look at, that 9 out of 10 parents underestimate the length of time kids should take off from playing any one sport during the year and protect them from overuse. You also want to remember that they could become burnout. It's great if kids like different sports, but let me just say that often it's good to go a season or, just one several month span and not do a sport. And the American Academy of Pediatrics, or AAP, and the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine say that children should take 2 to 3 months off a season. So if these two reputable groups of physicians are telling us this, I really believe there's something to that. And young athletes, of course, as I mentioned before, need at least 1 day a week away from organized activity. So hydration, approximately 4 out of 10 parents do underestimate the amount of fluids that a young athlete needs per hour. Children actually need to drink fluids every 15 to 20 minutes during physical activity to avoid becoming dehydrated. And let me just say, this is really for any type of sport or activity, even if they're playing outside, especially in the summer months, they need to make sure water breaks are happening. Not saying that sports drinks such as, oh, I've gone blank, but sports drinks and things like that, you know, help, but water is never going to be replaced. That is going to be our number one source of hydration.
Sports drinks like Gatorade.
Thank you. Thank
That's okay.
you. Gosh, I could see it. My husband drinks Gatorade Zero. I could see it right now and couldn't think of it. Thank you. Okay, so relying on coaches. Did a lot of reading on coaches, and some good things, some bad, some things to look out for. It really just tells us that parents rely on coaches for the safety of their athletes or their children, young athletes. But only 2 in 5 parents know how much sports training their coach has even received. So do some background on the coach. Let me say this with caution. In a lot of leagues or intramural type things, we rely on parents to step in as coaches. They may or may not have had sports training. They may or may not be aware of what needs to take place with the children. So do some checking, talk to your coach, be there to support. It may have been that no one else would step up and they did, which is great, but we also want to make sure that they understand things like kids taking breaks, kids drinking during activity, not doing, overuse. So we want to make sure they know that. And even well-trained coaches reported they would like more training. They would love the ability to have that. And, especially with things like preventing concussions and heat illness. So what's preventing our coaches from getting this training? It's cost, often lack of time, and then lack of local services for coaches. And so it really isn't the coach's fault per se. It really may be the league or the organization that they're coaching within not offering those things. And nearly half of all coaches indicated that they have felt pressure, either from parents or children, to play when a child is injured, or to play an injured child. So that really is something too that coaches have to deal with. And 3 out of 10 kids think that good players should keep playing even when they're hurt, unless a coach or an adult makes them stop. So again, that's that pressure being put on them. An example of that could be, let's say that a young athlete's ankle has been bothering them. They're a baseball player, for say, like here in the picture, and they know their parents want them to win, and they put that pressure there. They may never even tell you about the injury and play through it and then do damage that may be irreversible or long lasting. So we want to make sure that kids know they can stop playing when they're hurt. So sports-related concussions. This has been really a huge discussion in sports, especially over the past, I'd say, 4 to 5 years. Every sport carries some level of risk. Let me just say that. A lot of people focus on football, but it's also soccer and lacrosse and baseball, basketball, hockey, cheerleading. Every sport. I'd say this not not like saying it doesn't matter, but I will tell you that my daughter, when she was in 4th grade, suffered from a level 2 concussion. We had to go to the ER, showed all the symptoms of concussion, and we had to watch her for several weeks. And she bumped heads in the gym playing dodgeball. And so, something that seems so innocent, so easy, wouldn't think of concussion, that's where she got her concussion. So any sports activity could cause concussion. So here are a few signs that we observe as parents or guardians, and then some of the symptoms that athletes tell us. I won't go over all of them, but we do know that, one of the things is just them being confused, may look a little clumsy, may even lose consciousness for a little bit. Mood and behavior can change. You might notice these things. And then for the athlete, what they report is, of course, headache. If you ever notice nausea, vomiting, balancing problems, blurred vision, any of these things, you want to get them to medical attention as soon as possible. So recommendations from the American Pediatric Association, what do they say? They say that athletes with suspected concussion should not return to play within that game unless they are free of all symptoms. And they really don't need to return to play within a short time frame unless they've been watched for several days or been given the clear by a physician. And this may require a written release. In most states it does, and that's actually a good thing. A doctor can confirm the diagnosis, and then they get to decide when it's okay for them to return to play. So a few more recommendations just to take a look at and think about. Athletes should reduce their physical exertion level and their cognitive workload while recovering. So if there has been a diagnosis of a concussion or even suspected, this can be something you get from your physician. So you can take this to coaches, you can take this even to school. I know when my daughter had a concussion for about a week, they reduced the amount of written work she had to do, and actually her reading as well, because she really would begin to have a headache when she would work for over maybe 35-45 minutes. So symptoms of a concussion can actually hang around for about 4 weeks. But after that, about a month, you notice those symptoms go away. If they don't, please seek help from your physician, from your pediatrician. There's no evidence proving the safety or efficacy of any medication or supplement in treating a concussion. So, there really isn't a drug to help with that. It really is rest and just watching the child. And then retirement from contact or collision sports is just an individual decision. Sometimes a physician will say that it's not safe depending on the level of the concussion or the related health issues that came about. I will share again, a good friend of ours, their daughter was a softball player. She ran into another player, got a concussion, and not to make anyone fearful, but she suffered from extenuating circumstances or side effects of the concussion for up to a year. And she was not able to return to sports during that time. So it really is a individualized suggestion of your pediatrician whether or not to do that. And with all things considered, the dangers of inactivity surpass the dangers of not playing a sport. So it's not a good idea to say, okay, we're going to stay safe and we're not going to do any sports. There really are ways that you can do your best to make those provisions like we've talked about today to stay safe. We also want to make sure you understand that it helps kids develop things like leadership skills and self-confidence and working with a team. When we talk about, earlier, I know in the presentation, Jacqueline referred to a lot of very successful people giving credit back to sports. And really that's because it helps in these areas. And if they learn to work as a team and deal with success and failure, that just rolls over into life, into their career. So in addition, by participating in sports, children often find exercise enjoyable, and it actually helps them develop lifelong exercise habits or just the desire to be active. So when should you see a doctor, especially when we're talking about these symptoms with concussion? When they don't go away after rest or home treatment. For instance, the day we picked our daughter up from school, the concussion had just happened at the last period of the day. We took her home. Within about 30 minutes, she began to throw up, tell us that her head was hurting. So we knew right then that we needed to head into the ER. So any condition that affects training or performance that hasn't been diagnosed or treated, you really want to go see a doctor for that too. And then any condition that may be a risk to other teammates or competitors. So let me just say, we often hear stories of people who have just had a stomach bug and aren't really quite over it, and they go back to practice and they infect the whole team. Make sure that whatever illness or situation that your child's been dealing with, that you give that turnaround time, kind of that quarantine time. And that's really important right now with COVID-19, is to make sure that the coaches and parents are all on board, that if anyone shows any symptoms, even the star athlete on the team, really that they take some time to either go get tested or to have some time at home to make sure that's not going to be an issue. So these are the resources that I used. One of my favorite is healthychildren.org, and this is actually part of the American Pediatric Association. This is the website that they've created for parents. So it's full of information on what we talked about today. I also accessed safekids.org. This is a great reputable website that you can trust, and that gives you some things that you can actually print out, have available. It could even be some things that in a helpful, kind way you might even want to share with coaches. All right, so that is the end of my portion of the presentation. Are there any questions that I can answer for anyone? Any questions or comments? Let me say that.
Jessica, do you direct people to Medline Plus too for exercise
Absolutely.
for children?
Absolutely. So that is probably my number one go-to. Definitely send them to medlineplus.gov. In fact, through medlineplus.gov is where I found the resources with Healthy Kids and also Safe Kids. So those were recommended through Medline Plus. And what I love about Medline Plus also, if there are folks not aware of this, is it is 100% translated into Spanish, the entire website, and all resources. And then they have a lot of, different languages as well on different subjects, but that's really key, especially for the populations that I serve in Central Florida. We find so many first language Spanish that's just a great tool.
Any questions? Any comments? I know through the American Academy of Pediatrics, their Healthy Children resource, they do have some articles available in Spanish. I haven't been on it recently to check to see if everything is translated, but they do have resources available in Spanish too, which is nice.
Yes.
Sorry. Thought I had the phone on mute. And did you use any of the Nemours Kids Health resources?
Yes, I love Nemours. I think they're great. Also, one of the things that I direct parents to Nemours often, one of the other things that we have found out is through research on this and helping with a lot of our peds practices is that there's also a lot of reputable videos and podcasts on this too that that we direct people to. So if anyone would like those resources, please email me here at my personal email and I can send those to you as well.
And especially, there's a question in the chat about hydration, which is like the person that asked, it's very much a key element this time of year. It's as we progress into, through July into August, it gets very hot and humid and people don't realize how quickly they become dehydrated.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I've really stressed too, and our pediatric practices are stressing, is really just, being outside doing any activity in general. I know that one story that I share is a couple years ago, we realized that a lot of the theme parks were giving away free cups of ice water. And when I inquired from a friend of mine that works there, he explained to me that especially in the summer months, They were spending so much money taking care of people who passed out from dehydration that they felt it was important just to give them free water so that that wouldn't happen. And he said that the very top place for them to be dehydrated and pass out was actually the water parks. And he said that unfortunately, when we're at the beach or the pool or the water park, we often feel like we're in water. So we don't think about stopping to drink water. So I did want to add that too, that, when we're out, even in aquatic situations, we sometimes forget to stop and drink water and stay hydrated. So just wanted to put that little tidbit out there too.
Are you aware of any graphics that provide information about the about hydration and the amount of water needed and recommended fluids for children? Because
Sure. So I know, Mitzi, I saw that you were asking about that. If you want to email me that, I can definitely send you some resources and some things that maybe you could use when you're creating your graphic or your piece that you're putting together. So definitely, email me and I'll send you some stuff that I have.
Jacqueline, I was really impressed with the Project Play site because that's very, very user friendly and very helpful. And it's not just looking at this design, it doesn't seem to be overwhelming that, people, parents can just look for the portion that they need for their specific question, but they can go back and use it.
Yeah, definitely. I was surprised with how much information they did have there with all the different elements that they have. It's a really great resource.
Is it it's not a volunteer site, is it?
I don't believe
You
so.
had mentioned about the, the post question.
Yeah, it's an initiative of the Aspen Institute. I'm not sure exactly how how they're funded or anything.
if they're utilizing volunteers to help with that aspect of it.
Right. As far as like the professional athletes and the youth sports professionals, yeah, it probably is.
Yeah, I thought that was great, Jacqueline. I was not aware of that before I saw your presentation, and I think that is very helpful, especially for parents that are, that have young kids that are just starting to get involved in different sports, just to help them make a better educated decision. I like too about how much is sitting, how much is running. It made me think of when my daughter was 6, she was determined to play soccer. And we go and buy all the equipment. She signs up with the Family Y. She's on a team. We go out to the first practice. She gets in the car, and her first comment is, "Well, I don't want to do this anymore." And I said, "Why don't you want to do this anymore?" And she said, "I didn't know that you had to run, and I'm sweating and my bangs are sticking to my face." So, that tells you a little bit about her. She has now become an artist and a musician. But her first interactions, we really didn't look into it. We just kind of put her in this. She had heard other friends say they played soccer. So, and going on down the road, we found out that she loved volleyball. It's inside. It really, I think, is a great tool just for parents to take a look at what they want to even offer their kids to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was really great. Definitely see it being useful for a lot of people.
Well, and recognizing that, their interests change.
Yes.
What they may have been in a sport, and it's it may become so routine that it's like, well, no, I want to try something different. Well, we're coming up to 12:57. Anyone have any questions? Let's see. I'm trying to advance the slides. I know someone had to leave because they had a meeting starting at 1. again, appreciate everyone participating. We will be doing the next session will be Wednesday, August 12th, noon to 1 p.m. It'll be back to school. Jessica will be participating as a presenter. Again, we encourage everyone to submit topics because this is a developing project, so we're filling in month by month. So we have a few topics for the fall, but definitely open to suggestions. You can always contact Elise Aleo at TBLC. Tara Brigham is the immediate past president and the chair for the official strategic planning committee. Erica Powell is the chair for the TBLC FHSLA initiative committee, and I am just I'm there as the transition person because it's taken us 3 years to get this going. So Jacqueline Kasek is the current FHSLA president, so we appreciate, you can always reach out to her. If you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer or guide you to resources that would be freely accessible. And any other comments before we close it out for the day? Let's see, there's one. For the mandate about going back to school for 5 days, is it possible that some of the information could be in reference to settling into the new routines for school for COVID, especially for wearing masks when not to, keep it on all the time, health-wise? So yes, we will definitely keep that. Be sure to include that. I know one of the, I believe it's Elizabeth Waltham with the National Networks of Library of Medicine Southeastern Atlantic region is going to be a presenter too for next month. And I believe she was going to introduce some resources that it's a project that National Networks of Library of Medicine and the National Library of Medicine are initiating. So especially for kids that may be staying at home portion of the time, or may not be going back to school immediately. So there may be some resources that we can cover in that too. Again, appreciate everyone attending. Jacqueline and Jessica, thank you so much for presenting today. We really appreciate it. The slides will be available later this week or early next week, and we'll make them available. We'll send them both to Elise at TBLC and have them available for the official website. Recording is going to be Kelly Donald's going to take care of sending the link to the recording. And any last comments? Anything we need to cover before we wrap it up? Well, hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Take care and look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great afternoon.